The red sun hung low over the dusty plains of the border world. It was a very hot day, and the air shimmered with heat waves. Jack Sullivan wiped sweat from his forehead. He adjusted the strap of his rifle and looked across the empty valley. He was a Marine far from his home planet. His unit was supposed to be protecting a small group of human colonists who lived near the edge of known space. These people were farmers. They just wanted to grow food and in peace, but the borderlands were dangerous. The Krellin Empire claimed this land. They did not like humans being there. Jack walked along the perimeter fence. He felt quiet and calm. He had been in many tight spots before. He knew that panic was the enemy. Suddenly the sky changed color. Dark shapes blocked out the red sun. Large alien ships descended from the clouds. They made a loud humming noise that shook the ground. The alarm sirens began to wail. Jack ran toward the civilian tents. He shouted for everyone to get to the bunkers. The colonists were scared. Some froze in fear. Jack moved quickly. He helped an old man named Paul get up from the dirt. He pointed a young woman named Mary toward the shelter. Then the attack began. Green beams of light shot down from the ships. They hit the ground and kicked up dust. Krellin soldiers dropped from the ships. They were tall and wore heavy black armor. Their faces were hidden behind masks. Jack raised his rifle. He fired at the advancing aliens. He wanted to give the civilians enough time to hide. His shots hit the alien armor, but they kept coming. Jack moved from cover to cover. He was alone. Now his unit had been cut off by the explosion. It was just him against an army. He fired until his rifle clicked empty. He dropped the weapon and stood tall. He would not run. He would not beg. The aliens surrounded him. They pointed their weapons at his chest. Jack expected to die. He thought about his family back on Earth. He thought about his sister Susan. She always told him to be brave. But then the aliens did not shoot. One of them stepped forward. It made a strange noise through its speaker. A net was thrown over Jack. Then a bright light flashed. Everything went dark. High above the planet on the command ship, Princess Kayla watched the scene on a large screen. She was the heir to the Krellin throne. Her father, the Emperor, wanted this world, but Kayla was different. She was curious about humans. She had seen many battles. Usually, humans fought until they died. But this one had stopped. He had protected the weak instead of saving himself. Kayla leaned forward in her chair. Her advisors stood behind her. They whispered about the human threat. They said humans were chaotic and dangerous. Kayla was not sure. She saw something else in the humans' eyes. It was not fear. It was resolve. Jack woke up in a cold room. The walls were made of smooth metal. He was on a ship moving through space. He sat up on the floor. His hands were bound, but he could move his legs. He took a deep breath. He was alive. That was a good start. He did not know where they were taking him. He assumed it was their capital city. He closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered the last time he saw Susan. She had hugged him before he left for duty. She told him that kindness is the strongest armor. She said that weapons can break, but goodness lasts. Jack held onto those words. They gave him strength. The ship vibrated as it entered the atmosphere of the alien homeworld. Jack stood up. He walked to the barred window. Outside he saw city of silver spires. It was beautiful, but cold. There were no parks or green trees. Everything was metal and stone. He saw other aliens walking below. Some looked rich, others looked poor and tired. They wore rags and carried heavy loads. Jack frowned. He wondered how this empire worked. It seemed built on force. The door to his room slid open. 2 guards entered. They gestured for him to move. Jack did not fight. He walked calmly between them. As they walked down the hallway, Jack saw the servants of the Empire. They looked at him with wide eyes. They were used to seeing prisoners scream or cry. Jack did neither. He walked with his head high. He nodded politely to a servant who was cleaning the floor. The servant dropped her cloth in surprise. No prisoner had ever acknowledged her before. The guards pushed Jack forward, but they seemed confused by his behavior. They expected a beast. They got a man. Jack knew he was going to face their leader soon. He did not know what they would ask him. He did not know what they would do to him. But he knew who he was. He was a human. He would show them what that meant. The hallway ended at a large set of doors. The guards stopped. They waited for the doors to open. Jack stood still. He was ready for whatever came next. The air was thick with tension. The fate of the human warrior was about to be decided. But Jack Sullivan was not worried about himself. He was thinking about the people he had left behind. He hoped they were safe. He hoped his stand had given them enough time. He took another deep breath. The doors began to open slowly. A bright light spilled out from the room beyond. Jack stepped forward into the light. The heavy doors swung open with a low groan of metal on metal. Jack stepped into the vast throne room. The floor was made of polished black stone. It reflected the light from above like a dark mirror. The room was cold. The air smelled of metal and ozone. At the far end, a large throne sat on a high platform. Emperor Foreleg sat there. He wore robes of dark purple. His face was sharp and gray. His eyes glowed with a faint yellow light. He looked like a statue carved from ice. To his right stood Princess Kayla. She wore silver armor. Her face was softer than her father's. Her eyes were a deep blue. To the left stood General Holt. He was huge. His muscles bulged under his battle suit. He held a weapon in his hand. He looked ready to use it. Guards pushed Jack toward the center of the room. They wanted him to kneel. Jack planted his feet. He did not fall. The guards shoved him harder. Jack bent one knee slightly, but he kept his head up. He looked straight at the emperor. The nobles along the walls whispered among themselves. They were not used to prisoners showing respect without fear. Foreleg leaned forward. His voice boomed through the room. He asked Jack why he fought. He said the empire was inevitable. He said resistance was useless. Jack waited for the echo to fade. He spoke clearly. He said he fought to protect people. He said it was his job. Foreleg laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. He said humans were foolish. He said power was the only truth. General Holt stepped forward. He slammed the butt of his weapon on the floor. The sound echoed like thunder. He said humans needed pain to understand. He wanted to torture Jack. He wanted to know where the human ships were hiding. Jack shook his head. He said there were no ships, only farmers. Holt did not believe him. He raised his hand to strike. Princess Kayla moved quickly. She put her hand on Holt's arm. She told him to wait. She said force would not work here. She looked at Jack. She asked him why he saved the civilians. She said soldiers usually run to save themselves. Jack looked at her. he saw she was truly asking. He told her that humans value life. He said a leader protects the weak. He said fear makes slaves, but love makes allies. The court went silent. The nobles looked at each other. This was a strange concept. In the Krellin Empire, the strong ruled the weak. That was the law. To protect the weak was seen as a waste. Forlag stood up. He was angry. He said love was a weakness. He said the empire was built on strength. He ordered the guards to take Jack away. He said they would decide his fate later. Holt looked disappointed. He wanted to fight. Guards grabbed Jack again. This time, Jack went with them. He had said what he needed to say. As he walked away, he looked at Kayla. She was watching him. Her face was thoughtful. She was not looking at her father. She was looking at the servants in the back of the room. They were listening too. They looked hopeful. Jack was led out of the room. The doors closed behind him. The silence remained for a moment. Then Forlag sat down. He told Kayla she was too soft. He said she cared too much about feelings. Kayla did not speak. She looked at her hands. She thought about what Jack said. She looked at the nobles. They looked comfortable, but they also looked afraid. They were afraid of her father. She wondered if Jack was right. She wondered if the empire was broken. She decided she needed to know more. She would visit the prisoner. She would see if his words were true. The night was just beginning. The empire slept, but Kayla was awake. She walked away from the throne. She had a plan forming in her mind. The human had changed something in the room. He had planted a seed. Now she needed to see if it would grow. The lights in the throne room dimmed as the court dispersed. Kayla moved through the shadows. She passed the servants who bowed low. She noticed their eyes followed her. They were waiting for something. She did not know what yet, but she knew the human warrior had sparked a change. The old ways were being questioned. Forlag did not see it. He was too blind with pride. But Kayla saw it. She walked down the long hallway toward the cells. Her steps were quiet. She needed to hear more. She needed to understand this human concept of hope. It was dangerous. It was forbidden, but it felt right. The empire had stood for thousands of years, but tonight it felt shaky. Kayla reached the door to the holding area. The guards saluted her. She waved them away. She wanted to be alone with the prisoner. She placed her hand on the control panel. The door slid open. Jack was sitting on the bench. He looked up. He was not surprised. Kayla stepped inside. The door closed behind her. Now they could talk without fear. The real conversation was about to begin. The cell was small and quiet. The walls were made of gray metal. There was no window. The only light came from a strip on the ceiling. It hummed with a low sound. Jack sat on the hard bench. His hands were free now, but the door was locked. He rubbed his wrists. They were sore from the bindings. He looked at the door. He knew guards were watching him from the other side. He did not try to escape. He knew it was impossible. He just waited. Time moved slowly in the dark. He thought about Earth. He thought about the blue sky and the green trees. This place had no color. It was all gray and black. It felt sad. Jack closed his eyes. He tried to sleep, but the sound of footsteps woke him up. The door slid open. Servant entered. It was a small alien creature. It wore rough brown clothes. It carried a tray with food and water. The servant looked at the floor. It was shaking with fear. The guards stood behind it. They watched closely. The Servant walked toward Jack. Its hands were trembling. The tray slipped. The water pitcher fell to the floor. It broke with a loud crash. Water spilled everywhere. The guards shouted. They raised their weapons. They pointed them at the servant. The servant fell to its knees. It begged for mercy. The guards did not listen. They wanted to punish the mistake. Jack stood up quickly. He stepped between the guards and the servant. He held out his hands. He spoke loudly. He said it was his fault. He said he moved too fast and scared the servant. The guards stopped. They looked at Jack. They looked at each other. They were confused. A prisoner was protecting a servant. This did not make sense to them. In their empire, the strong punished the weak. A prisoner was weak. A servant was weaker. Why would the weak protect the weak? The lead guard lowered his weapon. He looked at Jack with suspicion. He did not believe the story, but he could not prove otherwise. He ordered the servant to leave. The servant looked at Jack. Its eyes were wide with surprise. It bowed low to Jack. Then it ran out of the room. Guards cleaned the water. They looked at Jack differently now. They did not see a beast. They saw something strange. They left the cell. The door closed again. Jack sat back down. He knew he might be punished later, but he did not care. He had done the right thing. Hours passed. The light on the ceiling dimmed. It was night in the capital. The hallway outside was quiet. Then the door opened. Again, Princess Kayla walked in. She was alone. She wore simple clothes now. No armor. She looked tired. She sat on the bench opposite Jack. She did not speak. For a moment, she just looked at him. Jack looked back. He waited for her to talk. Kayla asked him why he did it. She asked why he lied to the guards. She said the servant was nothing. She said it did not matter if it was punished. Jack shook his head. He said it mattered. He said every life matters. Kayla frowned. She did not understand. She said the empire needs order. Order requires sacrifice. Jack leaned forward. He told her that order built on fear is weak. He said true strength comes from caring for others. Kayla looked at her hands. She thought about her father. She thought about General Holt. They only cared about power. They never cared about the people. She looked at Jack. Again, she asked him if humans really believe this. She asked if all humans feel this way. Jack smiled slightly. He said most do. He said humans are not perfect. They fight and make mistakes, but they try to be better. He said empathy is what makes them human. Kayla was silent. She felt a change inside her. It was like a light turning on in a dark room. She realized her empire was broken. It was built on pain. She looked at Jack with new respect. She saw he was not just a warrior. He was a teacher. She stood up. She walked to the door. She stopped and looked back. She told Jack not to give up. She said things might change soon. Jack nodded. He trusted her. Kayla left the cell. She walked down the hallway. Her mind was racing. She thought about the servant's face. She thought about Jack's words. She knew she could not stay silent anymore. The sun would rise soon, and with the sun, things would be different. She walked faster. She had to make a choice. The empire was waiting, and she was the only one who could lead it to the light. The guards saluted her as she passed. She did not see them. She was thinking about the future. The night was over. The dawn was coming, and Jack Sullivan had changed everything. Kayla sat alone in her private quarters. The room was dark except for the blue glow of many screens. She watched the security footage again and again. She saw the moment in the cell. She saw the servant drop the water pitcher. She saw the guards raise their weapons to punish the mistake. Then she saw Jack step forward. He took the blame. He protected the weak servant. Kayla paused the video. She looked closely at the background of the shot. Other servants were watching from the hallway. They were not looking away in fear. They were looking at Jack with hope. They whispered to each other as they walked away. Kayla had never seen this before. Her people were used to pain. They did not expect kindness from those above them. This human was changing them. Without even trying, he was just being himself. She stood up from her chair. She felt a fire in her chest. It was a feeling she had ignored for many years. She knew she had to act. She walked out of her room. The halls were quiet. Most of the palace was asleep. Only the night guards were awake. They saluted as she passed. She did not stop. She went to her father's private study. The doors were heavy wood and metal. 2 large guards stood outside. They opened the doors for her without a word. Emperor Foreleg was inside. He sat at a large desk made of black stone. Papers were everywhere. He looked up when she entered. He looked tired but angry. His yellow eyes glowed in the dim light. Kayla walked to the desk. She told him to stop the execution. She said it was a mistake. Foreleg laughed. It was a cold sound. He said the human was a threat. He said fear keeps the empire strong. He said if they showed mercy, the people would rebel. Kayla shook her head. She said fear makes enemies. She said Jack Sullivan showed them a better way. She told her father about the servants. She said they were talking about the human with respect. She said the people were hungry for change. They wanted a leader who cared. Foreleg stood up. He was tall and imposing. His shadow covered the desk. He slammed his hand on the stone surface. He said he was the emperor. He said his word was law. He told Kayla she was too soft. He said her mother was the same way. Look where it got her, he said. The human would die at dawn. It would be a public example. Everyone would see what happens to those who resist. Kayla felt cold. She realized her father would never change. He loved power more than his people. He loved control more than life. She turned around. She walked out of the room without saying goodbye. She knew arguing was useless. He was too stubborn. She walked back toward the cells. She had to see Jack one more time. The guards let her pass. They knew she was the princess. She entered the cell. Jack was awake. He was sitting on the bench. He looked at her. He could see the trouble in her eyes. He knew the news was bad. Kayla spoke quietly. She told him her father ordered his death. She said the sun would rise in a few hours. She offered him a chance. She said she could disable the locks. He could escape into the city. He could hide in the lower levels. He might survive. Jack listened carefully. He did not look afraid. Then he shook his head. He said no. Kayla was surprised. She asked why. She said he would die if he stayed. She said it was not logical. Jack stood up. He walked to the bars. He looked at her with calm eyes. He said running would prove her father right. It would show humans are criminals. It would show humans are cowards, he said. He needed to stand firm. He told Kayla that she had the power to change things. He said she did not need to. She needed to free her people. He challenged her to be the leader she wanted to be. He said true leadership is sacrifice. Kayla felt tears in her eyes. She had never met anyone like him. He was facing death, but he worried about Her empire, he worried about strangers. She nodded, she understood she would not let him die for nothing. She turned to leave. She told him to hold on. She said dawn was coming, but it would be a new dawn. She walked out of the cell. Her mind was made up. She would use the ancient laws. She would challenge her father for the throne. It was dangerous. She could lose everything. She could be exiled or killed, but Jack had shown her that some things were worth the risk. She walked down the hall. The sky outside was beginning to lighten. The stars were fading. The time for words was over. Now was the time for action. The Empire would wake up to a new reality. Kayla moved with purpose. She went to the command center. She had preparations to make. The human warrior would not die today. He had already won the battle for her heart. Now she would fight for his life. The palace was quiet, but storm was coming. The servants were waking up. They did not know what was happening, but they would see soon. The princess was moving against the emperor. The human was the catalyst. The change had begun. Kayla reached the command center. She logged into the main system. She prepared the broadcast. She would speak to the whole world. She took a deep breath. She was ready. The red sun peeked over the horizon. It painted the silver city orange light. The execution square was crowded. Soldiers stood in rows. They held long spears that glinted in the morning glow. In the center stood a block of cold stone. Jack Sullivan walked toward it. He did not struggle. The guards pushed him gently. He climbed the steps. He looked at the sky. It was a beautiful morning. He thought of home. He thought of his sister Susan. He hoped she was okay. He hoped the farmers were safe. Emperor Forlag stood on a high balcony. He looked down like a hawk. He wore his royal robes. He looked powerful. General Holt stood near the block. He held a large axe. He looked happy to use it. The crowd waited. They were quiet. They were afraid. No one dared to speak. Suddenly a horn sounded. It was loud and deep. It echoed off the metal spires. Everyone looked to the main gate. Princess Kayla walked in. She wore white armor. It shone in the sun. She walked to the center. She stood between Jack and Holt. Holt growled. He asked what she was doing. He said she was breaking the law. Kayla raised her hand. She spoke to the crowd. Her voice was clear. She said there would be no death today. She said there would be truth. Forleg shouted from above. He ordered her to move. He said she was betraying him. He said she was weak. Kayla looked up. Her blue eyes were steady. She said she was saving the Empire. She pressed a button on her wrist. Large screens around the square turned on. They flickered to life. Everyone watched. They showed the video. From the cell, everyone saw Jack protect the servant. They saw the fear in the servant's eyes. They saw the kindness in Jack's eyes. The crowd gasped. They had never seen a ruler protect a worker. They had never seen a prisoner show mercy. Kayla spoke again. She said this human taught them more than years of war. She said fear was old. Hope was new. She asked the people what they wanted. Silence filled the square. It was heavy and thick. Then one servant clapped. It was a small sound. Then another servant clapped. Soon the sound was like thunder. The guards looked at each other. They lowered their spears. Holt looked around. He saw he was alone. He dropped the axe. It hit the stone. With a clang, Forlag saw the support fade. He saw the lights in the city change. The people were with Kayla. He slumped in his chair. He knew it was Over, he could not rule without loyalty. He stood up, he spoke into the microphone. His voice was weak, he said. He stepped down, he said Kayla was the new ruler. The crowd cheered. It was a sound of freedom. It shook the ground. Kayla turned to Jack. She smiled. It was a real smile. She cut his bonds with a small knife. Jack rubbed his wrists. They were red but healing. He thanked her. She said he saved them all. She said he gave them a new path. Jack shook his head. He said she walked the path. He just showed her the way. He said she was the brave one. Later that day the laws changed. The castes were ended. Beings were equal. The servants took off their rough clothes. They wore the same as the nobles. The streets were filled with music. People hugged each other. Jack was given a ship. He could go home. Kayla walked him to the landing pad. The sun was high now. It was warm. She gave him a data drive. It had the peace treaty. She said humans and Krellin would be friends. She said no more war. Jack nodded. He said Susan would be happy. He said his people would honor the treaty. He boarded the ship. The ramp closed as it lifted off. He looked down. The city looked different. It was brighter. There were green plants growing in the squares. The empire was healing. The metal felt less cold. Back on Earth, Susan waited. She watched the sky. The ship landed softly. The engines hummed. Down, Jack walked down the ramp. He looked tired but happy. Susan ran to him. She hugged him tight. She cried a little. She asked what happened. She asked if he was hurt. Jack smiled. He said he was fine. He said one person can change the world. He said kindness is strong. They walked away from the ship. The sun set behind them. The war was over. The empire across the stars was changing. It started with one warrior who refused to hate. It ended with a princess who chose to love. The galaxy was safer now. The Krellin people learned a new way. They learned that strength is not about hurting others. It is about helping them. Jack looked at the stars. He knew they were not enemies anymore. They were neighbors, and it all happened. By dawn, the human warrior had won. Without firing a shot, he had won with his heart. The story would be told for generations. It was a story of hope, and hope was the strongest weapon of all.